You want to know about records? Are you sure?
Since the dawn of man is really not that long, as every galaxy was formed in less time than it takes to sing this song. A fraction of a second and the elements were made. The bipeds stood up straight, the dinosaurs all met their fate. They tried to leave but they were late and they all died. They closed their asses on the oceans in Pangea. See, you wouldn't want to be set in motion by the same Big Bang. It all started with the Big Bang.
Okay, so the theory goes that some 13.7 billion years ago, the universe was formed from absolutely nothing, or as physicists call it, a singularity, by a super-duper El Grande explosion called the Big Bang Theory. And then about 10 billion years later, all from that massive explosion, Earth was formed by air and matter being lumped together, from massive gravity and electrical forces as that matter swirled around our sun. As Earth was forming, it was really a bad place to be, with volcanoes and no atmosphere and violent storms and continents shifting and oceans churning and a seemingly endless list of cataclysms, catastrophes, upheavals that lasted for another billion years, give or take a few million years, until about 3 billion years ago, things started settling down. But, as the theory goes, Earth had everything it needed to create everything we have today, including life. So here's where the whole theory of evolution gets a bit weird and requires a hell of a leap of faith. From nothing except carbon and hydrogen and oxygen and nitrogen and I guess many other elements in the periodic table, a one-celled organism found presumably in the ocean, right, that is in the one ocean, that doesn't look anything like the oceans we have now. By the way, an alternate theory is that the meteor landed in the ocean and had life from another galaxy far away. That seeded, as impregnated our ocean with life. But either way, a one-celled organism came to be, and a billion years later came out of the ocean as some reptilian thing that eventually, after another few 100 million years of trial and error, or as Charles Darwin noted in his seminal treatise on the origin and species of the descendants of man, this interminable process called evolution converted the one-celled organism into a whole mob of dinosaurs. No, not the Sopranos, but a gang of dinosaurs. Many people think that when the dinosaurs died, the theory goes that there were so many of them that between them decomposing, which is another word for rotting and other junk, the pressure from the earth over another million or so years turned into oil. That theory, however, is not quite true. In truth, there's actually decomposing plants after millions of years that created the oil that we have today. The dinosaurs were not dead long enough to make the oil because it takes millions and millions and millions of years to have enough detritus to make oil. When the plants were alive, they absorbed the energy from the sun that was stored in their bodies as carbon. So, after death, these plants decomposed into the sediment that they were covered by the oceans and the earth, and so great a pressure over a long time made oil. Yes, Texas tea, black gold. However, technically oil is a hydrocarbon because its molecular composition is carbon and hydrogen atoms, so really it's not tea or gold for that matter. But we came up with that because not only of the Beverly Hillbillies, but because a lot of people made a lot of money off of it. Yes, we've seen them in the movies and the books and pictures and even in the new feature Godzilla, but one day, a day measured in geologic terms, which means that one day can span a million years, the dinosaurs died off. Well, not all of them, because we still have lizards and alligators and cockroaches. Pests. But for the most part, the big ones died. How they died is a mystery. One of the prevailing theories is that there was a giant meteor that hit the Earth, which is now the Yucatan Peninsula, causing yet another cataclysm, and from the dust and fires, the shock waves, so much that the sun was obscured for a bunch of years, causing everything on Earth that was alive at that time to die. Everything except those cockroaches, because what would we do without them? Fast forward to the time of man. Somewhere around 4,000 years ago, the Babylonians were building a wall and needed to use something to seal the cracks and crevices. Nearby, there was this really gross big puddle that oozed and bubbled with black stuff, so they were like, what the hell, and tried that. Well, lo and behold, it worked really well until it caught fire really easily when the invading army from Persia, that is now Iran, set fire to it. But that's a different story. The ooze to the surface phenomenon is still happening today, and where else would you find ooze-smelling, disgusting raw petroleum? That is another name for oil, coming to the surface to make an uglier landscape even uglier? That's right, ladies and gentlemen, Los Angeles. The next time you leave the United States and go to North Mexico, also known as California, you can visit the La Brea tar pits downtown Los Angeles and see for yourself. Anyway, back to the history of this stuff. So, like with everything coming from Earth, people figured out ways to use oil, like those clever Babylonians. And it was the Chinese who were pretty good at blowing things up for all they invested gunpowder and fireworks in Chinese food that they figured they could use oil for fuel, so they wanted more. Ipso facto, the drilling started. The processing of oil at refineries creates petroleum products. The refined petroleum is used for many things, the most common of which is plastic. One form of plastic is vinyl. Vinyl is not a natural substance, but is a synthetic material made from several things, the most important of which is oil. It's a type of plastic that is made from ethylene, which is found in crude oil, and chlorine, which is found in regular salt. Because as every third grader knows, salt is made up of sodium and chloride, which is what chloride comes from. You know, chloride, the toxic stuff that people put in their pools, so the pools are clean but bleaches our hair and skin and bathing suits and whatnot. Anyway, when oil is processed into ethylene and mixed with chlorine, both the substances are combined to form polyvinyl chloride, PVC resin, or which is commonly referred to as vinyl. So, how does all of this have to do with playing music from the greatest band ever, which is Queen? Well, the vinyl is molded into these platters, or discs if you will, called records. Given that vinyl is pliable, a big word which means easy to fold and bend and model, the disc was printed with a series of concentric circles in an ever-shrinking radius towards the center of the disc. These circles were really grooves cut into the vinyl, but they weren't just regular grooves. These grooves were encoded with pits and valleys, and these pits and valleys were made in such a way that when a little tiny diamond the size of a needle, that's why it's called a needle, ran over the grooves, the diamond vibrated, because physics tells us that when something rubs on something else, the interaction of these rubbings creates vibrations. Now, these vibrations were picked up by sensors that converted the vibrations into impulses that created a series of mysterious forces to this day that no one can explain too well, though it's been around since back when the universe was formed. This mysterious force was first quantified, meaning kind of understood, in the late 1500s by a British scientist when he was probably trying to not knock up Queen Elizabeth, but he wrote a scientific paper and named this mysterious force Electra. Given that English doesn't like to have words that end in vowels, this force became known as electricity, which is what controls lights. It's what's running this camera. Well, it wasn't long before industrialists and scientists furthered the use and understanding of electricity, and even our own. Benjamin Franklin messed with it by flying a kite affixed in a thunderstorm with a key on the end of it. Well, we came to the realization that electrical energy and lightning were the same thing. So anyway, back to the impulses generated by the vibrations that were converted to what we now know as electricity. So this electricity oscillating according to the vibrations picked up by the diamond rubbing against the grooves was sent to speakers, just like the speakers we have today. And voila, music. The speakers of old, using quite different stuff than the speakers of today, simply took the electricity and made a membrane. Just like the membrane we have in our inner ear push air waves at a frequency that matched the oscillation of the electrical impulses. Then when the first record player was invented, as today, all the stuff was packaged into what we call a record player. As if overnight records went from recording voices to music. But it wasn't until the 1960s and 70s where a unique kind of music was being recorded that in essence changed the world. It was called rock and roll. The rock and roll's benign beginning emanating from a mix of soul music, which came from the hymns that American slaves sang to keep their faith and spirits high as they toiled, and from blues music that came from the deep American South. Rock and roll became the voice of a rebellious generation. And no, they weren't just about massive drug use and free sex with everyone and anyone and flower power. No. That generation became active in social causes, most notable of which was the one that highlighted why our young men were being slaughtered in a horrifically pointless war. So, the young generation, like our age of the time, took on the cause to stop what was the Vietnam War and used the music of the 60s and 70s in part as their instrument of rebellion in this fight. That rebellion was often as violent as someone like my dad saw firsthand when he attended a Led Zeppelin concert in Tampa Stadium on June 3rd, 1977. Rock and roll of this era molded the world, and changing the social consciousness of what was thought to be right was proven wrong. And what the music was conveying, which at first was thought to be wrong, was proved to be right, as demonstrated in the words of a rock and roll folk band of this era, Buffalo Springfield noted in one of their songs. There's battle lines being drawn, nobody's right if everybody's wrong. Young people speaking their minds, getting so much resistance from behind. Right. These songs, with their spectacular artwork in the 60s and 70s, were resonating in a generation, wanting to change the world by being incredibly creative, by being exceedingly poetic, and by being extremely contrary to the norms of the day, basically pissing their parents off. Clearly the movement had some dire consequences, the efforts of which we're still suffering from. So now you know why your parents are so damn weird. But notwithstanding the social implications, we were treated to awesome concerts like Woodstock and got some great music from phenomenal artists like Led Zeppelin, The Who, Black Sabbath, which you know today is Ozzy Osbourne, Pink Floyd, Jimi Hendrix, and Queen. By the way, it was old Thomas Edison, our very own industrialist extraordinaire and scientist, that came up with this idea of encoding sound bits and grooves on a disc and running that needle over them. He called this whole invention a phonograph, phono for sound and graph for engraving on the surface. So, you see, from the Big Bang to the dinosaurs, throughout the billions and billions and billions of years of Earth's history, we found a way in the really, really old days, like when our parents were kids, to create these things called records from vinyl, so they could listen to some great music like that from Queen. Signing off, forever your educator in big history, I remain, Marielle.